Hello, friends, and thank you for giving me your attention today. If you're already following the show, please know that I appreciate your support and I'm glad you keep coming back. If you're new to the show, please be sure to like and follow on Spotify, YouTube, or whichever platform you may be listening on. Please consider visiting BigAlRocks.com and clicking on the email newsletter to join my mailing list. I promise I won't flood you with a bunch of junk. Finally, feel free to leave a Spotify or YouTube comment on this episode or send an email to podcast@BigAlRocks.com with your comments, suggestions, and show ideas. Once again, thanks for your time and attention. On with the show. Hey friends, this is Big Al's Rockin' Podcast. I am back finally. This week I'm going to talk to editor and author Gary Graff, and we're going to talk about this wonderful little book here called 501 Essential Albums of the 80s. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Gary, and then we'll get started on the book.
Well, I've been doing music journalism, really since I was a teenager, and had the opportunity to do it once I graduated college. So you're talking since 1982 full time. That's been the work, and then I continue to do it. I'm still doing day-to-day music journalism. In fact, I just the other night I got off a run of 7 concerts in a row, which given the temperatures up here in the Midwest, and they were all and most of them were outdoor concerts, so I left puddles wherever I went. But continue to do that and then do the books, which is a wonderful thing to be able to do.
All right, well, we'll just jump right in. How did you take more than 2,000 albums from the 1980s and narrow it down to 501?
Well, I put out the word and had everybody send bribes. And whoever sent me the most money got their album in the book. No, not really, of course. Um, it is funny because when you first take it on, and we have a '90s book as well, 501 Essential Albums of the '90s. You think 501, that's a big number. How are we going to do that? And then you make a spreadsheet of about 24 or 2,500 albums, and all of a sudden you just have the opposite problems. Like, how the heck are we going to winnow it down? So it really is, it's a process of thought, it's a process of discussion. I have, in each of the books, I have a couple dozen contributors who are part of it. And, we have the discussions, and ultimately it's down to me to pick the final list. But I had a lot of input, and a lot of nice thing about the 80s and 90s is I was covering these albums in real time as they came out. So I had a pretty good perspective on what was essential versus what was, boy, I like that album, but it wasn't essential.
That's fair. Was the book your idea, or did someone approach you to work on it?
This actually came from the publisher. I think these are the fifth and sixth books I've worked on with Motor Books Quarto Press. And, we're always bouncing ideas around to each other, but, they came to me. I think they know I have editing experience and organizational experience. So, that made me a good candidate to not only do the writing, but kind of run the team to put the book together.
So, what was the process that you used to narrow the number down to 501?
Mostly gut, I mean, just, really some of it is a no-brainer. You have your Purple Rains and you're Born in the USA's and you're Like a Virgin's and of course Thriller and Bad, the obvious choices. And I'd say that accounts for about half the book. And then the others were, a really process of having those, I'll euphemistically call them discussions with the other contributors. They tended to be passionate and occasionally loud. And just kind of feeling everybody out and then taking all that input and all that opinion, some of which actually came from within my household, and sitting down and making the final decisions.
How long did it take from concept to completion?
It's funny because the '80s book came right on the heels of the '90s book, so people ask about timetable, and I'm always not always sure what it was. I would say between the two books, it was about 16, 17 months. And, again, the 80s book was if the selection of albums was harder for the 80s book, the process of doing the book was a little easier because the machine was up and humming. And we just kind of flowed into okay, oh yeah, now you owe me these entries by this date. But everybody was also kind of, very well indoctrinated into how it worked, what I was looking for in terms of the writing, what the entry should be like. So in that regard, the 80s book, felt a little bit easier.
Once you got the albums picked out that were going to make the final cut for the book, how did you figure out how to sort the albums in the book?
Well, we do them by year. Rather than actually pick 501 to one, we do them by year. The harder part is you probably noticed there's three different entry lengths in the book. Some have big 2-page spreads, some are a couple on a page, some are three on a page. So that was really the decision of, okay, so which one is a 300 word entry versus a 200 word versus a 90 word. And some of it's throwing darts on the wall. Some of it is again, like I said, the no-brainer. Obviously, the bads, the thrillers, the Born in the USA's, the Like a Virgin's, the Purple Rains are going to get the big long entries because they merit them. And then some of the others, yes, and then the others you just do, hopefully everybody feels like they're a winner because they're in the book and they're being termed essential. Even if the album got a 90 word entry as opposed to 300 words.
Gotcha. Were there many artists from the 70s who managed to make it to the 80s book?
Oh yeah, quite a few. Obviously, you had Springsteen, in there. I think we had some Rod Stewart in there, Robert Palmer, yeah, a lot of the punk acts, the Ramones, Elvis Costello. These are the ones, off the top of my head. But we did have a pretty fair representation of the evolution of the decade. So a lot of the acts that were very prolific and very prolific at a high level in the 70s were still there. Fleetwood Mac comes to mind. They were still making essential kind of albums into the 80s.
Okay. Now we spoke a little bit about the 90s book earlier, and you said that when you did the 80s book, it was a little easier because basically you had your template in place. From a decade to decade point of view, did you have more difficulty putting the 90s book together or the 80s book?
The selection process of the 80s book was harder because that was still a time, and hopefully we'll get to do a 70s book, and this will be even more the case. That was a time when you had very significant bands and artists releasing very significant albums every freaking year, and in some cases two a year. So you had to make these decisions like, okay, which REM album is not going to get in the book? Which Prince album isn't going to get in the book? Talking Heads, Elvis Costello. You had these very prolific artists, Thank you, Bruce Springsteen. You only did 4 albums during the 80s. That helps the cause. So that made it harder. There were more albums on the spreadsheet from the 80s. And one of the things that the 80s ushered in to the music industry was this idea that, okay, you don't have to put out an album every year, and it's okay to take a couple years, maybe even longer, between albums. And then by the time we got to the 90s, that was even more ingrained in the industry. So you didn't necessarily have as many acts putting out as many significant albums as we had in the 80s, and certainly not in the 70s.
Would you like to mention any of the other titles that you have done or anything that you're working on in an upcoming release?
So, previous titles I've done with my good friend Daniel Dirkholz in St. Louis. We wrote a book about Neil Young called Long May You Run, and we also did a book called Rock and Roll Myths, which is about all those great stories you hear and the truth, the false, whatever else is involved there. And I did a book about co-authored a book about Bob Seger called Traveling Man, which was with Thomas Weschler. I was the I have a I did a I edited a book, Bruce Springsteen, A to E to Z, which was kind of an encyclopedia like book about Bruce Springsteen, and also Alice Cooper at 75, which was celebrating his 75th, birthday with, with a book. And that was also with Motor Books and Quarto Press. And as you see, they have a design staff that's unparalleled. I mean, they make these gorgeous books. The Without telling me, the Alice Cooper book arrives and it's encased in black velvet, and which was really cool. And then what you have with the essential books, the 80s and the 90s, is a really well designed book. And I'd like to take some credit for it, and I can't because that's the design team, and they do such great work.
Well, I know you can't take credit for the books, but you are a, a well-known and well-published journalist. Do you care to talk a little bit about your career as a journalist and how you got started?
Oh boy. So I was no, I mean I would kind of go to Writers Anonymous and, hi, I'm Gary, or hi Gary, because I started really when I was in fourth grade writing for our little elementary school newspaper. And I didn't know it at the time. I just did it. And I always liked writing. And eventually, when I got to high school and I wasn't going to be my parents' nice Jewish doctor or lawyer, and I wasn't going to play third base for the Pittsburgh Pirates, which is where I grew up, that writing thing kind of took hold. And I was lucky enough to have a great journalism teacher in high school as well, who kind of recognized the passion and helped me develop it. And went to college, University of Missouri Journalism School, best in the country, and did a lot of stuff before I became a full-time music journalist. I was a sports reporter, an investigative reporter, did copy editing and page design and all those things, and just happened to come out of school, the right timing, right place. I was able to come up to Detroit as a full-time music writer. And you couldn't have asked for a 21-year-old kid, couldn't have asked for anything better than to get the music beat.
All right, where can my audience find you online?
Online, you can find me at Gary Graff on Music on Facebook, Graff on Music on X. I think it's Graff on Music on Blue Sky, and Real Graff on Music on Instagram. And I usually post everything to those. You can find me at billboard.com, at guitarplayer.com, various sites, but my own social media is kind of the best one-stop shopping.
Right on. Where can these books be purchased?
These books can be purchased wherever books are purchased. I always put in a plug for our great independent bookstores, the mom and pops who are, and some music stores too. And, certainly people in the Detroit metro area, if they see me tooling around, they can honk, and I probably have some in the trunk of my car. That I'm happy to sell you, but really, that's a long way of saying basically wherever books are sold, you should be able to get them.
All right, well, Gary, I appreciate your time.
Al, I appreciate you having me on. It's always a pleasure, and I'm glad you enjoy the books.
All right, take care.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Big Al's Rockin' Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe on your preferred podcast outlet. Visit BigAlRocks.com to find past episodes, on-demand links to my radio show, links to my social media, and other Big Al shenanigans. Most importantly, please like and share this episode. Peace out.